Her chest tightened as she looked down at herself, her voice trembling within her thoughts. How did it come to this? The glittering lights around her blurred, their radiance unable to hide the unease that flickered in her eyes. Everything felt surreal, how quickly things had spiraled beyond her control. She could still feel the warmth of his touch lingering on her skin, but her mind was already slipping into the storm of memories that led her here. One thing's for sure. Her voice echoed within the silence of her thoughts, growing colder, steadier. The colors faded into a blank whiteness, leaving only her regret behind. If my father had taken my side just a few days ago? The words burned in her mind. It wasn't just disappointment she felt, it was betrayal. A small decision, a few unspoken words had been enough to change everything. Things wouldn't have spiraled into such chaos. The sound of shattering glass broke through the stillness of her memory. Shatter! Pieces flew across the floor, scattering like fragments of her fragile peace. The moment replayed vividly, rage, misunderstanding, and silence colliding into one terrible instant. It was the beginning of everything falling apart. She stood before her father's desk, her back straight but her heart trembling beneath the surface. Papers drifted to the floor as the tension between them filled the room. Her father, seated with that familiar air of authority, regarded her coldly, his expression unreadable. She clutched the phone in her hand behind her back, trying to steady herself. The sunlight streaming through the curtains did little to soften the scene. It only made the distance between them feel sharper, more painful. His voice cut through the air, low, dangerous, and laced with fury. Say that one more time. The room fell into silence. The air itself seemed to freeze around his words. She could feel the weight of his anger pressing down on her, and for the first time, she truly realized how far gone everything was. The fragile thread connecting father and daughter had finally snapped. A sudden thump echoed in her chest as fear gripped her heart. Her eyes widened, trembling slightly as the world around her seemed to blur into a haze of red and black. Something cold and heavy pressed down on her, and she could almost hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Then came the voice, sharp, venomous, and dripping with disdain. You've gotten awfully full of yourself lately. Her knees quivered as if the weight of those words had crushed her spirit. The sound of her heartbeat grew louder, her legs trembling uncontrollably as dread crawled up her spine. The trembling spread to her fingertips, her entire body shaking like a fragile leaf caught in a storm. The silence between each heartbeat felt deafening, suffocating. Even the faintest movement seemed to echo in the darkness. The voice continued, cutting deeper than any blade. You're an illegitimate child with a mediocre university degree, a no-name art museum curator. Each word landed like a hammer, deliberate and cruel. The clack of approaching footsteps grew closer, clomp, each one marking the descent of her confidence into ashes. Her eyes widened, glowing faintly in the dim light as shock and humiliation washed over her face. You have no assets, the voice declared coldly. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The room spun, her pulse racing faster than her thoughts. She stood frozen, staring ahead, caught between disbelief and despair as the cruel truth was laid bare before her. The air grew heavy, dark shadows creeping along the walls as his cold voice cut through the silence. You do have a history of psychiatric disorder, he said, his words echoing like a sentence. The oppressive weight of his tone loomed over her, the darkness behind him swirling like a storm that refused to calm. He leaned in closer, his eyes sharp with disdain, and roughly gripped her forehead as if to remind her of her place. The woman froze, her breath catching in her throat. Beads of sweat trickled down her temple as she stared up at him, fear and disbelief battling in her trembling gaze. His expression showed no mercy, only control, and the cruel satisfaction of power. Whatever the reason, he continued, his voice low but unyielding, you have no right to say no to Dung Ung Group. The word struck her like thunder, final and absolute. Above him, the shadows thickened, reflecting the authority he wielded, a man who believed himself untouchable, his command unquestionable. He straightened slightly, his jaw tightening, as he pointed directly at her. The gesture was sharp, deliberate, filled with warning. Every muscle in his neck strained with anger, his veins standing out beneath the skin. His tone left no room for defiance. It was an order, not a conversation. But then something shifted. Her eyes hardened, the faint tremor in her voice gone. Say something like that one more time, she said coldly, her gaze lifting to meet his without fear. And I won't be so forgiving. The room seemed to still around her, his authority faltering for the first time. Her words carried quiet power, the kind that comes from someone who's been pushed too far and finally refuses to break. Under the soft glow of the evening light, a young woman gazes upward, her lavender eyes shimmering with quiet wonder. Her long, wavy hair cascades over her shoulders, and the delicate earrings she wears sway gently with her movement. The ornate brooch pinned to her crisp white blouse catches the light, reflecting a faint sparkle that mirrors the curiosity in her expression. It's as if she's just realized something both beautiful and unsettling. A sharp sound breaks the stillness. On the floor lies the shattered remains of a porcelain cup, its handle barely hanging on to a large fragment. The pieces are scattered, glimmering faintly under the room's dim light. The silence that follows is heavy, pregnant with tension and regret. No words are spoken, only a quiet pause that lingers in the air, like the echo of what just happened. A gentle knock echoes through the hallway. Knock, knock. The sound of footsteps follows, soft and cautious. The door creaks open slightly, revealing a glimpse of someone hesitating just beyond the threshold. The air feels thick, expectant, as though the visitor brings news that cannot wait. The door opens wider, and a pair of feet step carefully inside. Simple slippers padding softly against the wooden floor. A polite but firm voice breaks the quiet. "Excuse me, Chairman," the person says, their tone steady yet respectful. The formality in the words hints at the importance of the moment, and the air in the room seems to tighten. A woman with neatly styled hair and a composed demeanor stands before the chairman, her gentle smile betraying a touch of unease. "I'm sorry for the interruption, she begins, bowing her head slightly in apology. "But I wanted to let you know right away." Her words hang in the air, a prelude to something urgent, something that could not be delayed a second longer. The elegant woman in crimson stood gracefully, one hand placed gently against her chest. Her expression was calm, yet a subtle gleam of satisfaction danced in her eyes. The pearls around her neck shimmered faintly as she spoke, her composed demeanor hinting at the weight of the news she was about to deliver. Everything about her posture, the confident smile, the refined attire, spoke of someone accustomed to control and power. "That Dung Sang has arrived." The words hung in the air like a sudden gust of wind that snuffed out the room's stillness. The young woman's lips parted slightly, her breath catching in disbelief. The name alone was enough to send a chill down her spine, echoing memories or emotions she thought she had long buried. "What?" The single word slipped out before she could stop herself. Her pulse quickened, and instinctively, she turned her head sharply toward the source of the news. The sound of her movement filled the silence, the tension rising with every passing second. Her pink eyes widened as she spun around, shock flashing across her face. The light behind her caught the faint shimmer of her earrings and hair, but the sparkle couldn't mask the unease tightening her expression. Her heart pounded, confusion and dread intertwining as she whispered under her breath, almost to herself. Her trembling hand clutched her phone tightly, the faint red mark on her wrist visible under the light. Of all times, she hissed inwardly, frustration and disbelief flooding her chest. It was as if fate had chosen the worst possible moment to throw her world into chaos, and all she could do now was brace herself for what was coming. A sudden realization flashes across her face as she glances toward the door, her expression caught between surprise and unease. Was he supposed to come over today? She murmurs, uncertainty lacing her voice. The thought unsettles her. Something about the timing feels wrong, as if an unexpected twist is about to unfold. Before she can gather her thoughts, the older man standing beside her clicks his tongue in mild frustration. Tss, I wasted too much time. I'll head out now, he mutters, adjusting his coat with deliberate movements. She watches him silently, her lips parting as if to speak, but the words never come. The air feels heavier as he turns away, leaving her alone in the echo of his departure. Night falls quietly over the house. The woman's heels click softly against the polished floor, clump, clump, as she turned toward the door. There, standing in the dim light, is another woman dressed elegantly in red. The atmosphere thickens between them. Filled with an unspoken tension, neither seems eager to break. The woman in white tightens her grip on the phone in her hand, her knuckles paling slightly. She takes a measured step forward, her eyes fixed on the visitor in red. Each echo of her footsteps seems to fill the silence that stretches between them, amplifying the quiet storm building in her chest. The woman in red glances sideways, her eyes sharp yet composed, betraying little emotion. The faint glimmer of her diamond earring catches the light as she studies the other woman from the corner of her eye. A quiet understanding, or perhaps suspicion, passes between them, wordless but piercing. The sound of her name cut sharply through the silence. So young. Startled, she flinched, her eyes widening as her breath caught in her throat. The tone was calm, too calm, but it carried a weight that made her heart tighten. She looked up, meeting the steady, unreadable gaze before her. A bead of sweat formed at her temple as tension filled the room. The older woman took a slow, deliberate step forward, her voice steady, yet laced with quiet reproach. It's been over 10 years since you've been part of this household. Her words echoed softly, but each one landed heavily, filled with the weight of expectation and unspoken judgment. So Young stood still, her hands trembling slightly at her sides, unsure whether to defend herself or stay silent. Another step followed, the sound of slippers brushing against the floor, soft but firm. And you still think it's okay to upset your father like that? The accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. So Young's lips parted, but no words came out. The faint guilt and confusion in her eyes betrayed the storm inside her as the other woman's shadow loomed closer, poised, composed, and quietly merciless. The older woman's gentle hand rested on the young girl's shoulder, a soft pat filled with intent. Her eyes gleamed with affection, or perhaps something deeper, as she smiled warmly. I truly want us to be like real mother and daughter, she said. The words hung in the air, tender yet heavy, stirring something uncertain in the younger woman's chest. It was a promise, or maybe a demand, wrapped in the delicate disguise of love. Their figures stood close, framed by the soft daylight filtering through the glass. The woman in the red dress, graceful and composed, leaned in slightly, her tone still warm but commanding. The younger girl, dressed neatly, her posture tense, met her gaze, unsure whether to trust the sincerity in that smile. For a moment it looked like a genuine bond, a mother comforting her daughter, but beneath the surface something fragile trembled, as if one wrong word could shatter it. The atmosphere shifted. The same gentle hand that once offered comfort now brushed against the girl's hair with a restrained calm. "Come out when you've calmed down," came the voice, measured, coldly patient. The touch lingered, not out of tenderness, but control. The girl's silence filled the room, her breath caught between shame and defiance, while that familiar hand reminded her who held the power. "And once you do," the woman continued, her voice fading into a chilling calm, "make sure not to mess up again." The girl stood frozen, her thoughts a blur of confusion and regret. The sound of heels clicking against the floor, step, step, echoed like punctuation to the reprimand. When the door closed behind the older woman, the air seemed to collapse in on itself, leaving the younger one alone with her trembling hands and the weight of those words. The sound of quiet footsteps echoed in the still air. Step, step. Out of the deep, shadowed blue background emerged a solitary figure. The woman's long, wavy hair glimmered faintly in the dim light, cascading over her shoulders. Her face remained hidden in the gloom, giving her presence an air of mystery and tension, as though she were walking towards something inevitable. The atmosphere around her was heavy, a mixture of silence and anticipation. The woman came fully into view. She wore a refined black dress layered over a crisp white blouse, cinched neatly at the waist by a slender belt. In her hand, she held a phone, the device catching a faint gleam of light as she moved. The soft sound of fabric brushing against itself, flip, broke the stillness. Her poise was elegant, but there was something restrained about her movements, as though she were holding back emotions she couldn't yet reveal. Her hand tightened around the phone, knuckles paling under the pressure. A single word surfaced in her mind, echoing with weight and sorrow. "Father." The silence that followed seemed almost alive, filled with the gravity of her thoughts. The darkness around her pressed closer, but she stood unmoving, her resolve hidden behind the quiet strength in that one whispered word.